What happens when a warrior's sense of honor collides with the brutal reality of life on the frontier? In this story, one decision sets off a chain of consequences that no one could foresee. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story, and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The scorching sun beat down mercilessly on the vast Texas plains as Swifthawk rode along the perimeter of the Comanche camp. The year was 1868, and tensions between settlers and native tribes had reached a boiling point across the frontier. Swifthawk, respected warrior of the Numunu people, had just returned from a hunting expedition when he noticed unusual commotion near the edge of the encampment. From a distance, he could see a group of young warriors surrounding someone. Their jeers and laughter carried through the dry air, an unsettling sound that made the hairs on his neck stand up. Swifthawk dismounted his dappled Mustang and approached with measured steps. As the circle of onlookers parted, he saw her, a white woman kneeling in the dirt, her blonde hair matted with dust, her blue dress torn at the shoulders. Her face bore the marks of recent tears, though she now maintained a stoic expression despite the taunting. "Stand aside," Swifthawk commanded in their native tongue. The younger men hesitated, exchanging glances before reluctantly creating a path for him. The woman didn't raise her eyes, keeping them fixed on the ground. Swifthawk recognized her as the captive taken during a raid on a homestead 2 moons prior. She had been assigned to tend fires and help with cooking under the supervision of Yellow Leaf, an elder woman. She had caused no trouble, yet here she was, surrounded and humiliated. "What is happening here?" Swifthawk demanded, addressing Red Wolf, the ringleader of the group. Red Wolf, barely 20 summers old and eager to prove himself, stepped forward with a defiant tilt to his chin. "This white woman tried to steal a horse. She was escaping." Swifthawk turned to the woman. "Is this true?" For the first time, she raised her eyes to meet his. There was fear there, but also a fierce determination that he couldn't help but respect. "I was not stealing," she said in halting Comanche words she had learned during her captivity. "I was returning from the river with water when they surrounded me." Swifthawk noticed the overturned water skin at her feet, its precious contents soaked into the parched earth. He looked back at Red Wolf, whose expression betrayed his lie. "You dishonor yourself with untruths," Swifthawk said, his voice low, but carrying the weight of authority that made the younger warrior flinch. "And you dishonor our people by treating a captive this way." Red Wolf's face darkened with anger and embarrassment. "She is just a white woman. Her people killed my brother in the last moon." Swifthawk understood the young man's pain but could not condone his actions. "Your brother was a warrior who died with honor. There is no honor in tormenting a defenseless woman." He extended his hand to the captive, who looked at it with suspicion. "What is your name?" he asked, switching to the broken English he had learned from traders. "Sarah," she replied cautiously. "Sarah Mitchell." "Come, Sarah Mitchell. You will not be harmed further." When she hesitated, he added, "I give my word as Swifthawk, son of Running Bear." Something in his steady gaze must have convinced her, for she slowly placed her hand in his and allowed him to help her to her feet. The gathered warriors watched in silence, some with resentment, others with newfound respect for Swifthawk's intervention. As they walked away, Red Wolf called out, "Chief Black Cloud will hear of this. He has decreed that all white captives are to be treated as enemies." Swifthawk turned, his expression grave. "Then I will speak with the chief myself. Until then, no one touches this woman." He guided Sarah toward his mother's teepee, where she would be safe for now. The old woman, Singing Bird, had always been known for her compassion, even toward those from enemy tribes. "Why did you help me?" Sarah asked as they walked, her voice barely above a whisper. Swifthawk considered her question carefully before answering. "My father taught me that true strength is shown in how we treat those who have no power. The young men who tormented you, they are not strong. They are afraid." "Afraid? Of me?" Disbelief colored her words. "Of what you represent. Change is coming to our lands. They feel it, as do I." He glanced at the horizon, where distant dust clouds marked the passage of cavalry patrols. But fear should never guide our actions. As they approached Singing Bird's teepee, the old woman emerged, her weathered face creasing with concern as she took in Sarah's disheveled appearance. Without a word, she ushered the captive inside and shot her son a questioning look. I must speak with Black Cloud, Swifthawk told his mother. Keep her safe until I return. Singing Bird nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. Be careful, my son. The chief's heart has grown hard since losing his wife to the white man's sickness. Swifthawk mounted his horse again and rode toward the center of the camp, where Black Cloud's large teepee stood adorned with the symbols of his authority. The decision to intervene had been instinctive, but now he needed to consider his words carefully. The fate of Sarah Mitchell, and perhaps his own standing in the tribe, would depend on what happened next. Chief Black Cloud's teepee cast a long shadow as the afternoon sun dipped lower in the western sky. Swifthawk approached with respect, dismounting and waiting for permission to enter. The guards at the entrance, adorned with eagle feathers denoting their status, regarded him with stern expressions, but allowed him to pass after a brief exchange. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of burning sage and tobacco. Black Cloud sat cross-legged on an elaborate buffalo hide, his face lined with the wisdom and hardship of 60 winters. Despite his age, his eyes remained sharp, missing nothing as Swifthawk entered and took his place across the fire. I have heard of your actions today, Black Cloud began without preamble. You interfered with the punishment of a captive. Swifthawk met the chief's gaze steadily. There was no punishment, only torment. The woman had committed no offense. Red Wolf claims she attempted escape. Red Wolf speaks falsely. His heart is clouded by grief for his brother. Swifthawk chose his next words carefully. The woman, Sarah Mitchell, was completing tasks assigned by Yellowleaf when she was surrounded and humiliated. Black Cloud was silent for a long moment, smoke from his pipe swirling between them. You have always been different from the others, Swifthawk. You learned the white man's tongue. You studied their ways. Some whisper that you sympathize too much with our enemies. I seek to understand them, Swifthawk replied. Knowledge of an enemy is a powerful weapon. And yet today, you protected one of them. Swifthawk leaned forward slightly. I protected the honor of our people. The Numunu have always been fierce in battle, but we do not make war on unarmed women. A flicker of something, perhaps approval, crossed Black Cloud's weathered features. You speak like your father. He too believed in the old ways. The chief tapped his pipe against a stone bowl, considering. Tell me, what would you have me do with this captive? Allow her to continue working under Yellowleaf's guidance. She has shown willingness to learn our ways and has caused no trouble until Red Wolf's interference. Black Cloud exhaled a plume of smoke. And if I decide she should be ransomed back to her people, or traded at the next meeting with the white officials? Swifthawk felt a strange tightness in his chest at the thought, but kept his expression neutral. That would be your right as chief. Until then, I ask only that she be treated with the dignity afforded any captive who shows respect to our customs. After what seemed an eternity, Black Cloud nodded. Very well. The woman will remain under Yellowleaf's supervision, but I am also making her your responsibility, Swifthawk. If she attempts escape or brings harm to our people, it will be on your head. I accept this responsibility, Swifthawk replied, knowing the weight of the chief's decision. There is something else. Black Cloud set aside his pipe, his expression grave. Scouts have reported increased cavalry movements to the south. The white soldiers are establishing a new fort just 2 days' ride from here. Swifthawk frowned. They encroach further onto our hunting grounds. Yes. And with them come more settlers, more fences, more destruction of the buffalo. The chief's voice carried the weariness of a man who had witnessed the slow erosion of his people's way of life. I am calling a council meeting tonight. We must decide whether to move our camp northward or stand our ground. As Swifthawk departed the chief's teepee, his mind was heavy with these new developments. The establishment of another fort meant increased pressure on the Comanche way of life, potentially forcing difficult choices in the near future. He walked thoughtfully back toward his mother's dwelling, where Sarah Mitchell waited. When he arrived, he found Sarah sitting beside Singing Bird, awkwardly attempting to help the older woman prepare dried berries for storage. She had been given clean clothing, a simple dress of soft deerskin, and her hair had been combed and braided in the Comanche style. The transformation was striking, and Swifthawk paused momentarily in the entrance. Singing Bird noticed him first. Your father would be proud of what you did today, she said in their language, her eyes crinkling with a knowing smile. Sarah looked up, her hands stilling over the work. "What did the chief say?" she asked, unable to mask the fear in her voice. Swift Hawk moved to sit across from them. "You will continue to work with Yellowleaf, but you are also now my responsibility." He switched to English, wanting to be sure she understood fully. "If you try to escape or harm anyone, I will bear the punishment." Sarah's eyes widened. "Why would you take such a risk for me? I believe people should be judged by their actions, not where they were born or the color of their skin," he replied simply. "You have worked hard and learned our ways without complaint. This deserves respect." Singing Bird watched their exchange with interest, though she understood little English. She rose with a soft grunt and moved to the cooking area, giving them a moment of privacy. "How long have I been here now?" Sarah asked quietly. "I've lost count of the days." "Nearly 1 moon cycle," Swift Hawk replied. "About 30 days in your counting." Sarah's eyes drifted to the teepee opening, where the late afternoon light filtered through. "My father and brother will be searching for me, if they survived the attack." Swift Hawk felt a pang of sympathy, but kept his voice even. "The raid was led by warriors from a different band. I cannot speak to who survived." A heavy silence fell between them, filled with the unspoken realities of their situation. She a captive, he her reluctant guardian, both caught in the grinding conflict between two worlds. Finally, Sarah spoke again. "Thank you, Swift Hawk. Not just for today, but for seeing me as a person." Her voice caught slightly. "Some days I fear I will forget who I am." "Who were you before?" he asked, genuinely curious. "In your previous life?" A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "I was a teacher in a small settlement near Fort Richardson. I taught children their letters and numbers." Her expression softened at the memory. "My father was a minister. We came west because he believed God called him to bring his word to the frontier." Swift Hawk nodded, understanding more about her now. "Teachers are respected among your people?" "Yes, though not paid very well," she replied with a hint of humor that surprised him. "Among the Numunu, the Comanche, those who pass knowledge to the young are also respected. Perhaps we are not so different in some ways." The moment of connection was interrupted by shouts from outside. Swift Hawk rose quickly and moved to the teepee entrance. In the distance, riders were approaching the camp at speed, Comanche scouts returning with urgency that suggested trouble. "I must go," he told Sarah. "Stay here with my mother. You will be safe." As he stepped outside into the fading daylight, Swift Hawk couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. For the tribe, for Sarah Mitchell, and for himself. The peace he had brokered for her might prove to be short-lived if the returning scouts brought news of conflict with the white soldiers. The council fire blazed high into the night sky, sending embers spiraling toward the stars that had guided the Numunu people for countless generations. Around the flames sat the tribal elders and war chiefs, their faces etched with concern as they listened to the scouts' report. Swift Hawk sat among them, his position as the son of a respected warrior granting him a place in these deliberations despite his relative youth. "They come with many soldiers," Running Deer, the head scout, was saying. "More than the fingers on both hands counted 3 times. They bring the big guns that shoot far and horses pulling wagons filled with supplies." Black Cloud's expression remained impassive, though Swift Hawk could see the tension in the chief's shoulders. "How close are they to our hunting grounds?" "They have begun clearing land for their fort where Buffalo Creek meets the Red River," Running Deer replied. "They cut trees and dig into the earth. Already they have raised their flag." Murmurs rippled through the assembled leaders. That location was not just hunting territory but sacred ground where generations of Comanche had conducted important ceremonies. Broken Knife, an older warrior with a scar bisecting his face, spoke next. "We should attack now, while they are still building. Strike before their walls are strong." Several voices rose in agreement, but Swift Hawk noticed the chief's hesitation. When the clamor subsided, Black Cloud raised his hand. "Such an attack would bring more soldiers," the chief said. "Always they return with more. We have seen this pattern with other tribes." His gaze swept across the council. "We must think not just of today's battle, but of our children's future." Swift Hawk felt the weight of the moment pressing upon him. He had witnessed firsthand the devastating power of the white man's weapons during a peace delegation 2 years earlier. The memories of the cannon's destruction remained vivid in his mind. "Chief," Swifthawk said, respectfully waiting for Black Cloud's nod before continuing, "perhaps we could send a delegation to speak with their leader, establish boundaries that respect our sacred sites." Broken Knife scoffed. "They do not honor boundaries. Every treaty they make, they break when it suits them." "This is true," Swifthawk acknowledged, "but a delegation would also allow us to observe their strength up close, to see their weapons and count their numbers accurately. Knowledge that would serve us whether we choose peace or war." Black Cloud considered this, stroking his chin thoughtfully. "Your words have wisdom, Swifthawk, but who would lead such a delegation? It would require someone who speaks their tongue." The implication hung in the air. Swifthawk knew he was one of the few in the tribe who could communicate effectively in English. His father had insisted he learn from traders and a captured settler who had lived among them for several years before dying of fever. "I will go," Swifthawk offered, meeting the chief's gaze steadily. "With your blessing." "And if they take you prisoner," Broken Knife challenged, "or kill you for approaching their camp?" "I will carry the peace feather and approach openly," Swifthawk replied. "Even the white soldiers recognize certain symbols." Black Cloud nodded slowly. "You will take 2 warriors with you, Grey Wolf and Tall Pine. They are steady men who will not act rashly." The chief raised his voice to address the entire council. "We will send this delegation, but we also prepare for war. If Swifthawk's words fall on deaf ears, we must be ready to defend what is ours." As the council continued discussing preparations, Swifthawk's thoughts turned unexpectedly to Sarah Mitchell. The establishment of a new fort could change her situation dramatically. If negotiations failed and conflict erupted, captives might become liabilities, or valuable bargaining chips. When the council finally dispersed in the early hours before dawn, Swifthawk made his way back to his mother's teepee. He found both women asleep, Sarah curled on a buffalo robe near the dying embers of the cooking fire. In sleep, the wariness that usually guarded her features had vanished, making her appear younger and more vulnerable. Swifthawk sat quietly at the teepee's entrance, watching the first pale light of dawn creep across the eastern horizon. His mission to the fort would begin at midday, giving him little time for rest, but his mind was too active for sleep. He was still sitting there when Sarah awoke, her eyes finding him immediately as she oriented herself. "Something's happened," she said, reading his expression with surprising accuracy. Swifthawk nodded. "Your people are building a new fort on our sacred lands." Sarah sat up, pulling a blanket around her shoulders against the morning chill. "Which regiment? Did your scouts say?" "They described blue coats with yellow cloth here," he indicated his shoulders, "and a flag with many stars." "Cavalry, then," she murmured, "probably from Fort Richardson." A complicated emotion crossed her face, hope mingled with concern. "What will your tribe do?" "I am leading a delegation to speak with their commander." Swifthawk studied her reaction carefully. "We leave at midday." Sarah hesitated, then asked tentatively, "Could you deliver a message, just to let them know I'm alive?" Swifthawk considered her request. Such a message might actually help his cause, showing goodwill while confirming the tribe held valuable captives. Yet he also recognized the risk. The soldiers might demand her immediate return, potentially under threat of force. "I will tell them a white woman teacher lives among us," he said finally. "No more than that for now." Relief flooded her face. "Thank you. My father, if he's there, he needs to know I'm alive." Swifthawk's mother stirred then, rising to begin the day's preparations. She gave her son a questioning look, and he briefly explained the council's decision in their language. Singing Bird's weathered face creased with worry. "Your father walked between 2 worlds, and it brought him both wisdom and pain," she said softly. "I see you following the same path." As the morning progressed, Swifthawk prepared for the delegation. He chose his finest buckskin shirt, adorned with porcupine quill work that signified his status. Around his neck, he wore a necklace of bear claws that had belonged to his father, a talisman of protection. Grey Wolf and Tall Pine joined him, similarly dressed to reflect the solemnity of their mission. Before departing, Swifthawk sought out Sarah once more. She was working with yellow leaf, grinding corn into meal, when he approached. "I will be gone for perhaps 2 days," he told her. "My mother will ensure you are protected in my absence." Sarah set down her grinding stone. "Be careful," she said, surprising him with the genuine concern in her voice. "The soldiers are on edge after recent attacks. They may shoot before listening." Swifthawk nodded, appreciating the warning. "Is there anything about their ways I should know? Something that might help our words be heard?" Sarah considered this seriously. "Ask to speak with the chaplain, as well as the commanding officer. Military men respect the church, and a minister might advocate for peaceful resolution." She hesitated, then added, "And if my father is there, Reverend Mitchell, he has influence with many of the settlers." "I will remember this advice," Swifthawk promised. As he turned to leave, a strange impulse made him add, "When I return, perhaps you could teach me more of your written language. In exchange, I could teach you more of ours." The offer seemed to catch her off guard, but after a moment she nodded. "I would like that." As Swifthawk mounted his horse and led the small delegation from the camp, he found himself in an unexpected position, carrying hopes for peace from both his people and the captive woman who was increasingly becoming something more complicated than an enemy. The burden was heavy, but his heart was resolute as they rode toward the rising dust cloud that marked the white man's encampment in the distance. The fort was little more than a collection of half-constructed wooden buildings surrounded by a partially completed stockade wall when Swifthawk and his companions arrived. They stopped at a respectful distance, on a rise overlooking the bustling activity, and Swifthawk raised the peace feather, a white eagle feather attached to a slender branch, high above his head. It took less than a minute for the soldiers to notice them. Swifthawk observed with detached interest as men shouted and ran for their weapons. Officers barked orders, and work on the fort temporarily ceased. 3 mounted soldiers approached cautiously, rifles at the ready. "I speak English," Swifthawk called out when they were within earshot. "We come in peace to talk with your chief." The lead soldier, a weathered man with a sergeant's stripes, regarded them suspiciously. "State your business." "We bring words from Chief Black Cloud of the Numanu, the Comanche people. We wish to speak of boundaries and peace." The sergeant spat to one side. "Peace, is it? After your people raided the Mitchell homestead last month?" Nevertheless, he gestured for them to follow. "You'll surrender your weapons before entering." Swifthawk translated this for his companions, who looked unhappy, but complied with his nod. They handed over their bows, knives, and tomahawks at the fort's makeshift gate, keeping only the ceremonial peace pipe that was essential to their mission. Inside, the fort was a hive of activity. Soldiers and civilian workers moved lumber and dug trenches, while others erected tents and stacked supplies. Swifthawk noted everything with careful attention: the number of men, the crates that likely contained ammunition, the corrals holding cavalry horses. This information would be valuable regardless of the outcome of their talk. They were led to the largest completed structure, a wooden building with a veranda that clearly served as the command center. On the porch stood a tall man with a gray beard and the insignia of a colonel, along with a younger officer and, to Swifthawk's surprise, a man in black clothing with a white collar who could only be the chaplain Sarah had mentioned. "Colonel Harrington," the sergeant announced. "Delegation from the Comanche, sir." The colonel studied them with hard eyes that had seen many battles. "I am Colonel James Harrington, commander of this installation. Who speaks for your group?" Swifthawk stepped forward. "I am Swifthawk, son of Running Bear, representing Chief Black Cloud of the Numanu people." He was careful to use the formal introduction that would convey respect in both cultures. The colonel raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by Swifthawk's command of English. "And what does Chief Black Cloud have to say to the United States Army?" "Our chief wishes to establish clear boundaries between our hunting grounds and your fort. This place where you build sits on land sacred to our people for many generations." The colonel's expression remained impassive. "This fort is being constructed on land ceded to the United States government by treaty. We have every right to be here." Swifthawk had anticipated this response. "The treaty you speak of was not signed by the Numanu bands who have always hunted these lands. We do not recognize its authority over us." A tense silence followed his words. The younger officer whispered something to the colonel, who frowned but nodded slightly. You speak our language well, the colonel finally said, changing tack. Where did you learn it? From traders, and from a settler who lived among us for a time. The man in clerical dress stepped forward. I am Reverend Thomas Wilson, chaplain to this company. May I ask if your people are currently holding any white captives? Swift Hawk met the chaplain's gaze steadily. We have a white woman living among us. She was a teacher before she came to us. This statement caused an immediate stir. From the back of the veranda, an older man with a grief-lined face pushed forward. A teacher? Is her name Sarah Mitchell? Is she alive? The intensity of the man's question confirmed Swift Hawk's suspicion. Are you Reverend Mitchell? I am, the man replied, his voice breaking slightly. Sarah is my daughter. Please, is she well? Swift Hawk felt an unexpected sympathy for the man's obvious distress. She is alive and unharmed. She grinds corn with our women and has learned some of our language. The relief that washed over Reverend Mitchell's face was palpable. Thank God, he whispered. Colonel, we must arrange for her return immediately. Colonel Harrington raised a hand to silence him. All in good time, Reverend. He turned back to Swift Hawk. I presume the return of captives would be part of any peace negotiation? That would be for the chief to decide, Swift Hawk replied carefully. But it could be discussed if our concerns about the sacred land are addressed. The colonel's jaw tightened. This fort will be completed as planned. However, he added, seeing Swift Hawk's expression darken, perhaps we could discuss which specific areas nearby hold particular importance to your people. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. Swift Hawk glanced at his companions, who were following the conversation through his brief translations. They gave slight nods of encouragement. We would be willing to show your representatives the sacred sites that must remain untouched, Swift Hawk offered, and to discuss safe passage for both your people and ours through shared territories. What followed was 3 hours of tense but productive negotiation. Maps were brought out, boundaries proposed and adjusted. Swift Hawk was surprised by Colonel Harrington's willingness to compromise on certain points, though he remained inflexible about the fort's location itself. Throughout the discussion, Reverend Mitchell hovered anxiously, clearly desperate for news of his daughter but restraining himself from further interruptions. As the talks concluded with a tentative verbal agreement to be formalized later, Reverend Mitchell finally approached Swift Hawk directly. Please, may I send a letter to my daughter? He asked, his voice thick with emotion. Just a few words to let her know her father lives and prays for her return. Swift Hawk considered the request. There seemed no harm in it, and it might actually help build goodwill between the communities. You may write your words. I will carry them to her. While the Reverend hurriedly penned his letter, Colonel Harrington took Swift Hawk aside. I appreciate your willingness to negotiate, but understand this. If any harm comes to the Mitchell woman or any other captives, there will be severe consequences. The Army does not take kindly to the abduction of civilians. Swift Hawk met the colonel's stern gaze without flinching. And my people do not take kindly to the theft of our ancestral lands. But for now, we choose the path of peace if you will walk it with us. When they finally departed the fort, the sun was already dipping toward the horizon. Swift Hawk carried Reverend Mitchell's sealed letter and a formal document outlining the preliminary agreements. He also carried something less tangible, a cautious hope that bloodshed might be averted, at least for now. The return journey to the Comanche camp was made in silence, each warrior lost in his own thoughts about what they had witnessed. It was nearly midnight when they arrived, but Black Cloud had waited up for their return, eager for news. After Swift Hawk delivered his report to the chief and council, describing both the negotiated boundaries and his assessment of the fort's military strength, he sought out his mother's teepee. Despite the late hour, a small fire still burned inside, and both Sarah and Singing Bird were awake, their faces anxious in the flickering light. You've returned safely, Sarah said, relief evident in her voice. Swift Hawk nodded, settling beside the fire. I have something for you. He withdrew the sealed letter from his pouch and handed it to her. Sarah's hands trembled as she took the folded paper. My father, he's alive? Yes. He is at the fort, serving as a minister to the soldiers and settlers. Tears welled in her eyes as she opened the letter and read her father's words by firelight. Swift Hawk watched as emotions played across her face. Joy, longing, and something more complex that he couldn't quite identify. He says he negotiates for my return, she said finally, looking up. That the colonel has agreed to include me in the peace talks. This is true, Swifthawk confirmed. The safe return of captives is part of the agreement we are working toward. An unexpected silence fell between them as the implications of this news settled in. For nearly 5 weeks, Sarah had been part of the Comanche camp, initially as a frightened captive, then gradually adapting to their ways. Now the prospect of her departure was suddenly real and imminent. What happens next? She asked quietly. There will be a formal council with representatives from the fort in 10 days, Swifthawk explained. If all goes well, arrangements will be made then. Sarah nodded, folding the letter carefully. 10 days, she repeated, almost to herself. In the days that followed, Swifthawk noticed a subtle change in Sarah's demeanor. She threw herself into learning more Comanche phrases, spent additional time helping Singing Bird with her tasks, and even joined the women collecting berries beyond the camp's perimeter, activities she had previously approached with resignation rather than enthusiasm. On the evening before the formal council was to convene, Swifthawk found Sarah sitting alone by the creek that ran near the camp, watching the sunset paint the water with gold and crimson. My mother wondered where you had gone, he said, sitting beside her on a flat rock. I needed to think, she replied. Tomorrow everything changes again. Swifthawk nodded, understanding her reflective mood. You will return to your father and your people. This is good. Yes, she agreed, though without the joy he might have expected. But I find myself thinking about what I've learned here, about the Numunu, your customs, your respect for the land. She turned to face him directly. My father's congregation fears and hates the Comanche because they don't understand your ways. Perhaps I could help change that. Swifthawk regarded her with surprise. You would speak for us? I would speak the truth as I've experienced it, she replied. That there are good people among the Comanche, just as there are among the settlers. That understanding might achieve what violence never will. Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition of shared purpose that transcended their different worlds. The next day, as representatives from the fort arrived for the council meeting, Sarah stood alongside Swifthawk and Black Cloud to welcome them. She wore a dress that Singing Bird had made for her, combining elements of both cultures, a gesture that did not go unnoticed by either delegation. When Reverend Mitchell spotted his daughter, he rushed forward with a cry of joy, embracing her tightly. Swifthawk stepped back, giving them space for their reunion, though he noted that Sarah, while returning her father's embrace, kept glancing back toward the Comanche who had become her temporary family. The negotiations proceeded with surprising smoothness. With Sarah helping to bridge cultural misunderstandings, agreements were reached on territorial boundaries, mutual notification before hunting parties entered disputed areas, and procedures for addressing future grievances. Finally, the formal arrangement for Sarah's return was confirmed. She would leave with her father when the council concluded. As Sarah prepared to depart, she sought out Swifthawk one last time. I want you to have this, she said, pressing a small object into his hand. It was a simple wooden cross on a leather cord, modest but clearly precious to her. This was my mother's, she explained, to remind you that friendship can exist even between those who walk different paths. Swifthawk accepted the gift with solemn respect. And for you, he replied, removing the necklace of small turquoise beads from around his own wrist. To remember that you have friends among the Numunu. As Sarah climbed into the wagon that would carry her back to the fort, she called out one last phrase in perfect Comanche. Until we meet again under peaceful skies. Swifthawk raised his hand in farewell, the wooden cross cool against his palm. Until then, he replied in English, watching as the wagon pulled away. Black Cloud came to stand beside him as the delegation disappeared into the distance. You have done well, Swifthawk. Your father would be proud. We have bought time and understanding, but the challenges remain. Swifthawk replied honestly. Yes, the chief agreed. But today we found a path other than war, and perhaps, in that teacher who lived among us, we have found an unexpected voice for peace among our enemies. Swifthawk touched the cross now hanging alongside his bear claw necklace, two symbols from different worlds, side by side. Like the tentative peace they had established, it was fragile but full of possibility. And for now, that was enough.